Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business with me, Jason Dukes. Really appreciate you being here every week for the show and specifically learning from some of the biggest business people in the industry and really learning from them and getting to know about their full background, who they are as a person, and the things that really actually make a difference in their business. Today, we're honored to have Paul Lee with us. Paul is a Top Fuel Funny Car driver, team owner, owns Paul Lee Racing. But is also the owner and president of Wharton Automotive Group, which has brands and companies such as McLeod Clutches, FTI Performance, and also Silver Sport Transmission. Paul has a great story, both of how he got into racing, being a racer, business, health, even. So that'll be some of the things that we talk about. So let's go ahead and bring on this week's guest, Paul Lee. Paul, how you doing today?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to share your story. So, like in all episodes, we start at the end and then we go to the beginning and tell the whole story or however much of the story we can get into in an hour. But tell us about now, like October of 2023. What are all the things you're into?
Well, right now we're getting ready for. Business-wise, we're getting ready for the SEMA show and the PRI show. So it's that time of the year, every end of October and then into December, back-to-back big shows for our company. SEMA show, it's, we have the Las Vegas race, and so we're there for the race. And then on Monday, we start setting up for the SEMA show. So every year, our team and the McLeod and Wharton team are there for 10 days every year. And it's actually our busiest week of the year. We do so much work and meetings and business at the SEMA show. It is the best show for our brands. And then we change gears into more racing stuff because we have both. We have aftermarket street brands, and then we also have pure racing brands like FTI. So that's a little bit different concentration. But then we slide right into the PRI show in December. So it is a busy time of the year for us for business. And then, of course, we have the last two races, Vegas and then Pomona. So we fit those in there while we're getting ready for the shows.
So most of the fans probably know about the Top Fuel Funny Car team, but just tell us a little bit about the team, where you guys are today.
As far as performance, we're not in the countdown or anything like that, but we go to race to win. We have all the best parts that anybody else out there has. Our shop is in Indianapolis. We're in Brownsburg. Our race car team is housed at Don Schumacher Racing. So we're kind of a satellite team there. And we, not only do we, have the car for racing, but it is a marketing tool. I mean, it really is a marketing tool for our brands that fits perfectly in what we're doing. Because our customers are the ones either racing or sitting in the stands or watching on TV, right? So it's a perfect marketing tool for our companies to use. And now the last two races we did 14 to 15 races a year. We're not a full-time team, although we're working towards being a full-time team. And that's all about business. It is a separate business, and you have to have the right funding to do it right. We do less races, 14 to 15 races, because we do them hard. Our budget is to go race hard. We're not there just to show up and go down the track. When we go to a race, we're there to win. We're trying to win. We're racing hard, but we're having fun. And then at the same time, doing a lot of marketing for our brand sales with our big customers like Summit and Jegs. And so it is a tool, not just for the racing, but it blends into the Wharton Automotive Group and all the brands that it's used for. And then we display the car at the SEMA show. Our race car would be on display in the hallway. It usually is every year. And this year, the SEMA at the PRI show will probably have the race car on display there as well. So it's a race team, marketing tool, and it all blends together.
Very awesome. Very awesome. So that's where everything is today. Let's talk about the beginning. Where did this start? We have some familiar roots, at least statewide.
I grew up in New Jersey, southern New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia on the New Jersey side. And when I was a kid, my grandfather is the one who introduced me into racing. He would take me to Atco Dragway to watch the race cars when I was a kid. I remember when I was 5 years old. This is one of my early. Everybody says, like, what is your earliest memory, right? And you know what mine is? Mine is actually I was like 5 years old, 4 or 5, and I was on my grandfather. My grandfather was a big guy. He's no longer with us, but he was like 6'2". He was a big dude. I don't know. I didn't get those genes. I'm a little guy, but yeah, he was a big guy. I remember sitting on his shoulders at Atco Dragway, and he used to tell me to plug my ears and watch the Top Fuel dragsters run. That's my earliest memory. So
Not just earliest racing memory, like earliest
no, that's my
memory.
earliest memory. So I think that's kind of like to set the how people grow up in the sport, and they're hanging around at the track, and they kind of grow up in it. There's a lot of people like that, second, third generation racers. I wasn't necessarily a second generation racer, but my uncle did race A-Gas Supercharged back in the late 60s and early 70s. So we used to go and watch him race at Atco Dragway. And so then when I turned 17, naturally, I started racing there with my mom's Duster. She had a 74 Plymouth Duster with a slant 6. And I just got my driver's license, and I used to tell her that I was going on dates, and they had Friday night racing there. So I used to take my dates to Atco Dragway and race her car. She never knew it. That's how I started. But
Gotcha.
another Atco Dragway moment was when I was 13, and I was a little older then, and I got to see the Nitro Funny Cars, right? Jungle Jim and all the Tom McEwen and Don Perdome and all of them back in the early 70s or mid 70s when I was in junior high, and that kind of set the hook. I saw Jungle Jim do this quarter-mile burnout, backed up at like 80 miles an hour. The crowd was just going nuts. And then he raced. I remember he was racing the Ram Chargers funny car. And back then, Atco Dragway didn't have walls along the side of the track. That it was grass.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, when they're racing, I remember watching. He was the first pair up, and they left the line, and Jungle Jim went off to into the side of the grass, right off the track. Never lifted. There's grass flying and planes throwing. Got back on the track, and he beat the other guy in the lane. It was like the crowd. I just remember I remember like it was yesterday. The crowd was going absolutely nuts, and I go, "That's what I want to do."
Wow.
I was 13 years old, and that's all I've ever. And everything that I've done, including all this, what I've done and professionally, is all been so I could drive a Nitro Funny Car. That's been my whole life goal. I knew what I wanted to do at that moment.
I'm still trying to process that story because my first drag race was probably late 80s, early 90s. So by then, all the tracks had walls.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, this is back in the 70s. I'm old. So, I graduated high school in 76. So this was like 1974, maybe, around 74-ish. I remember 73. Bob Fry was the announcer at the track. That's where he's from.
Uh-huh.
And then that got me hooked on racing. And then when I turned 17, I didn't have a car. And like I told you, I used to take my mom's car. That's how I started drag racing.
And so I know that you got involved with a couple of teams and started track. Like there are pictures of you at different national events and different tracks, helping people out. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah. I actually, I was working. I was working in as a weekend job in Atlantic City in the casino, right? And this was 1980, maybe 79 or 80. And I remember Al Segrini came walking through the casino, and I recognized him, right? He's not somebody that everybody would recognize unless you're into drag racing, right? So I introduced myself to him, and we got to be friends, and we're actually still friends to this day. But anyway, he invited me. This is when he had the Super Brute team back in the early 80s, and he invited me to come work on the car. And I said, this is awesome. That was the first car I ever worked on. I was just a gopher. I did everything, any, odd job they needed, like starting at the bottom. So I went with him to some races in 1981. I remember he went to the finals of the Spring Nationals in 82. And if you look at the old pictures of that, he raced the Chi-Town Hustler in the final, and I'm standing behind the car on the starting line. You could see it. I still have a copy of the TV. Remember, Diamond P Sports used to have those. So Al Segrini gave me my first job at the track, and then I also knew the Bonifani family. So Nick Bonifani Sr., Nicky Jr., and Rob who they're like brothers to me. I grew up with those guys, and their dad had a race car. So I used to go and hang out with them as well. That's how I got started.
Gotcha. So tell us about how your your high school and then college years were going in parallel to you also getting this racing experience.
Well, I went to I graduated from Clearview High School in South Jersey, and then I was a wrestler. So I had went to on a wrestling scholarship to the University of Maryland for 1 year, and then what happened? I tore my shoulder. It's still to this day I have a replaced shoulder, and that ended my wrestling career. So I changed colleges, and then I kind of changed my path, and kind of bounced back here. What do I want to do? And then I guess in early 80s, I wanted to be I knew I wanted drag racing in my life, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. So I didn't have rich family. My mom and dad were school teachers. The thing that they taught me was to study and get good grades, right? I mean, I didn't come from a wealthy family where they could buy me a race team. So I figured, well, how am I going to ever be a race car driver, right? So I decided to, I saw like guys like Don Perdome and Don Garlitz and Shirley Muldowney sit out because they didn't have sponsors, right? They didn't have their own businesses. I saw guys like Connie Coletta and Joe Amato who had their own businesses that continued the race. They controlled their own destiny. So I thought to myself, early on, it was like, well, if Don Perdome and Don Garlitz and Shirley Muldowney can't get sponsors, then who am I? Who am I? I'm never gonna, I'm not gonna. Nobody's gonna ever sponsor me, right? So that's when I kind of like hit me, like, okay, so I need to follow a path here. Whose path am I gonna follow? Well, that's when the guys like Connie Coletta and Joe Amato were the guys I looked up to, because they were successful businessmen and they controlled their own destiny and they could race even if they didn't have a sponsor. So that was kind of set the path for me. So then that's when I decided to, go to business school. Went to the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania. Fortunate enough to get in. Luckily, I had good grades and good test scores, and I got in there. And then after I got out of there, then I went to I got my master's degree in finance and my law degree from Rutgers University in New Jersey.
Rutgers.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
so that's kind of why I did that. I knew that I would have to be successful in business if I ever wanted to be a race car driver at the level that I wanted to do it, like Top Fuel. Okay. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to drive a nitro funny car since I was 13. And the way I'd have to do it is I'd have to be successful in business, because I didn't have rich family, and no one's going to hand me over millions of dollars to go race. Right. If those big names can't do it, then I'm certainly not going to do it. So that's the, guys like Connie and Joe Amato, they were my guys that I looked up to, and I kind of molded my path towards those guys. So went to school, and then, I went to law school, and, I thought, okay, I worked at the Philadelphia Stock Exchange in the legal department. That was my first
Actually,
job.
I do have a question about that, because I think that's a huge turning point or decision point in your life of like taking the time to see how different people are doing it and choose your path. Like, how old were you when that happens? And tell us a little bit about like the mindset that you were in or physical space that you were in. Like, how does a person that age slow their, I think I look at our country or just society, and it's like, well, we have a bunch of 17, 18, 19-year-olds trying to figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And it's, it's one of those things where it's like, it's a terrible time to.
Yeah, I used to I have in the past to go to schools and career day, things like that, and talk about, how do I pick a career path? And basically, it's you pick your passion, right? What is your passion? And then you find a way to make a living with your passion. And if you do that, you'll never work a day in your life, right? So yeah, I mean, I didn't figure it out right away. In my early 20s, I actually had a skydiving accident when I was in my early 20s. I used to skydive a lot. When I wasn't racing a whole lot in my early 20s, because I didn't have any money, but I raced when I could. And then I was skydiving a lot, and I was in a serious skydiving accident in 1983 or 84, where I broke my legs, crushed my heel, hip, broken pelvis, 3 broken ribs, and a punctured lung.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I got seriously hurt then, and then I was still kind of tossing around. I hadn't figured it out yet, that career path. I was just working jobs and not really had a direction yet. But I knew it had to be racing. So do I get a job in racing, or do I work for a race team? That was at the point where I was tossing around what I wanted to do, and then in the mid '80s is when I late '80s is when I started to it wasn't right after high school. It was a few years after that I
Okay.
kind of figured out, okay, this is how I'm going to have to approach it. If I want to ever race car, be a top fuel funny car driver, this is what I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to go to, get the best education that I can, and then start from there. And then I worked at the stock exchange, and I drove alcohol funny cars for different teams back in the '90s. This is back in the '90s now. Drove alcohol funny cars in Division One. Raced in Division One. So I used to race against Frank Manzo and Bob Newberry, and they used to beat me up every week. And that's where I learned to be good on the tree, because those guys, they just beat me up for years,
Hmm.
And in drag racing, you got to have a good car, right? So I just kind of drove cars that I just to get experience. I just drove different cars and worked my way up that way, and then worked at the stock exchange, and then I raced sporadically in Division One. Didn't race a lot of national events. Mostly it was just Englishtown and Maple Grove.
Hmm.
And then raced the Division One schedules, and didn't really have any success because I didn't have a good car and didn't have the money for a good car. So I had a good job at the stock exchange. It was a good paying job, but it still wasn't where I wanted to be, right? And another turning point was 9/11, believe it or
Hmm.
not. So
I believe it.
yeah,
I'm a New Jersey guy. I believe it.
yeah. So I used to travel a lot from Philadelphia to downtown New York City for work. I used to, because I worked at the Philadelphia Stock Exchange, so I used to travel up to Manhattan and downtown, and I used to go to the American Stock Exchange, Merrill Lynch, all the big investment firms. I used to go up there for work, and I spent a lot of time up there. And my brother lived a block and a half from the World Trade Center, and I used to stay with him. 110 Greenwich, he lived. Literally a 1.5 blocks from the second tower. Used to stay with him, and we had a great time. But I wasn't racing as much as I could, because if the stock market was open, I had to be at work. The only
Right.
time I could take a weekend off or a Friday off was if I took a vacation day, right? So it's like I did that for a long time, but it gave me a lot of business foundation, right? So and now go back to early '90s, mid '90s. Like I said before, I grew up with the Bonafani family, right? And they were just now growing with the clutch business, Bonafani
Hmm.
Friction, right? So I used to go over there at their shop after work at the stock exchange during the week and help them with the business part, right? Help them grow their business. And then after 9/11, I decided to leave the stock exchange. My job kind of changed because if you remember, right after that happened, I used to work in IPOs. I used to do a lot of IPO work. And after 9/11, the IPOs dried up for a long time. If you remember, there wasn't any IPOs for like a year and a half. I mean, there were some here and there, but it wasn't like a steady stream of that kind of work. So my work slowed up. I didn't get laid off or anything, but I decided it was time to, you know, uh, I wanted to race more, and I'm getting older. Now this time I'm in my late 30s. It's like, now it's time to really do what I really want to do and be an entrepreneur, being successful in business. And I want to race more. I want, that was I did all this work so I could race and have a goal of, racing in the NHRA, Top Fuel and funny cars. So then I went to work for Bonafani, and it was great because I went to work for them full time. They were right outside of Philadelphia, right where I lived in West Philadelphia. And then went to work there, and then I was able to go race more. Then I teamed up with Jeff and Bonnie McGaffick. They had an alcohol funny car, and they had a really good car. So then I went to work to drive for them. We made a deal, drive for them, and that's when I won my first national events. Was 2000 I raced with them 2002 to 2004. And in 2004 is when we actually got a brand new car. We had Steve Boggs as helping us as a crew chief, and we won 3 national events that year
Oh wow.
and finished in the top 10. So that was the best year I'd had up to that point. And we were racing in, and in 2005, Jeff decided he wanted to race Top Fuel Funny Car, and of course I did too. It was like, yes, here's finally my chance that I worked for my whole life. In 2005, when Jeff bought the Nitro Funny Car team from Don Perdome, he bought actually Tommy Johnson's the second car. If you remember back then, they actually parked. They had 2 cars. Don Perdome had 2 cars, and then he downsized to just the Ron Capps car. So
Right.
we bought the Tommy Johnson team from Don Perdome, and that's how we started in Top Fuel Funny Car.
Okay.
Then we, got my license, and then I actually in 2005 I actually raced Top Alcohol Funny Car and Top Fuel Funny Car at the same time. There were races, and there was actually 2 national events where I drove both cars.
Oh wow.
At the same race. I drove at the 2005 U.S. Nationals and at the 2005 Chicago National event. I drove Alcohol Funny Car, Top Fuel Funny Car, and did the clutch on the Top Fuel Funny Car. I was worn out.
Right. And with the Top Fuel Funny Car team from Perdome, did that come with just the equipment, or the equipment and the people?
No people. That we had our own team, and
Okay.
Steve Boggs continued to be our crew chief. He had never tuned a Top Fuel car before, but he's a very smart guy, and the team owner at the time had faith that he could do it, and sure I did too. And but we weren't very successful. I mean, you don't just hop in there and tune a Top Fuel Funny Car, right? You need time, you need runs, and Steve he would have been good at it if he had a fair shot at it, but he just didn't get a fair shot at it. So, but we did have our own team, and we kind of like built our own team. We raced IHRA. We went to 6 different finals. We won. We didn't win a race with that team, but I proceeded and I hooked up with Paul Smith and his team. Paul Smith is the guy who actually taught me how to drive a funny car.
Okay.
So, alcohol funny cars are very forgiving. Okay, so alcohol funny car, you can wander around the track. You have to do your shift. It's a hard car to drive. It's very mental, but it's very forgiving. And what I mean is, you can get it out of the groove and wander around, and it really won't do anything because it doesn't have the power, to overpower the track. So, and when I started driving the Nitro funny car, and remember, it's still quarter mile back then, and I was wandering all over the track with this car, and which in a Nitro funny car, that's not good. So I was at a test session in Indy, and then Paul Smith pulls me over, and I had known Paul Smith, from just being around the races, and then he pulls me to the back of the car, and he goes, "You're wandering all over the track," and he goes, "Do you know why?" I go, "No." He goes, "Look at the back of this car." He's pointing at the Nitro funny car. He goes, "Look at this wing. Look how big it is." And they look at the alcohol funny car over there and see how little that is. He goes, "Downforce." He goes, "Alcohol funny car has no downforce. So you can wander all over the track because you don't have the horsepower to overpower it. But this Nitro funny car has a lot of horsepower, and you have a lot of downforce. So when you steer the car that way, it's going to go that way." Right. So I was going like this, going down the track, and I'm all over the track.
Right.
And it's like he said, just feel it, be ahead of it, bump it in. Don't be over aggressive, but you can be aggressive, but not over aggressive. So I said, all right, I'll try that. And I went straight down the track, and that's the way I've been driving ever since.
Oh wow. Wow. It's always funny that sometimes just those little moments and little inputs make a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean that 5 minutes he spent with me, changed my driving. And you do have to drive them differently. You can't drive the fuel funny car like an alcohol funny car. And I had driven alcohol funny cars. Shoot, I started in 1988 with my own alcohol funny car. That's how long I've been driving funny cars. 1988 was my first year.
Gotcha. So from a business side at this point, you're still at Bonafonte, or where?
Yeah.
Where are you
So I was still at Bonafonte, and then I was their CFO. Right. This is 2004, 2005. Worked with them. We built the business pretty well. And then 2007, one of our customers at Bonafonte was McLeod Clutches in California, right? And Red Roberts was the founder of McLeod back in 1971, and he supplied all the racers, and he was a big customer of Bonafonte. And then I remember he came to us one year at the PRI show. This was 2007. And he said, at this time he had sold it to an investment group. And the investment group, kind of changed the business, took away part numbers, and basically decreased the business. They were running it into the ground, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So he was afraid that it was going to go out of business. And he came to us and he goes, you guys need to buy McLeod, right? Meaning to Bonifani. We're there because you guys need to, because it's I've been in business in 71. It's about ready to close. They're ruining the business, the investment group, and you guys need to take it over. And then Nick Bonifani Sr. At the time, who owned Bonifani Friction, he's no longer with us, but then he was there, and I asked him, I said, are you interested in doing this deal? And he goes, no, I'm not interested at all. I go, well, okay, well, I'm going to pursue it. So this is my chance to have something for myself, being an entrepreneur, because that's why I went to school and did all this, is so I could have my own business like Joe Amato and Connie Colletta. Maybe not at their level, but the same principle, right? To be able to control my own destiny. So I made a deal with the company, and I ended up buying McLeod in 2009 or late 2008. We closed in December 2008. I moved out here. I lived in Philadelphia. I just grabbed a bunch of clothes, got on an airplane, and came out here and lived at the extended stay for like 2 months. I still had my house back in Philly, and basically started to revamp and rebuild the business. That's how it started.
Nice.
Getting all the customers. It took me about a year and a half to really get back the structure that the other company had lost. The customers had left, and the vendors had left, and so I had a lot of rebuilding to do. So I spent a year and a half rebuilding the company, and then that's where it started. And now we're, this is 2023. Now we have McLeod Racing, we have FTI Performance, we have Silver Sport Transmissions, and we picked up a new brand late last year, Powertrain Technology, which is the 7 1/4, 5.5 inch clutches.
Nice.
So we have that here too.
Well, and because this is a business show, racing business show, can you talk a little, as much or a little bit about the initial acquisition of McLeod? Because we have you here at Bonifani. Well, I guess a couple of things, right? Like, as much as you want to tell about the some of the financial things.
Sure. I mean, I didn't have.
Also interested. I was just going to say, also interested in the relationship parts too, of like, what is it like to be CFO at a company, and then, see an opportunity, the company's not interested, but you are, and knowing that means that that the relationship has to end.
Yeah. There was a lot of issues with McLeod when I was first looking into it. You do your due diligence. Okay. First thing you do is, when you're trying to buy a company, is, you're getting their financial information, their history, and you do what's called due diligence. You're looking looking behind the walls, and you're looking in the cabinets of the business. What have they done right? What have they done wrong? Right. Well, what they did wrong was, when bigger investment groups buy companies, they look at it differently than a mom and pop or an individual owner looks at it. Mm-hmm. Investment groups, they want, what's their return on investment this week, right? That's what they're concerned about, because you have investors, right? These people invest, and they want to know what their return. They're not necessarily big picture outlook. It's not like maybe they're building for a 5-year, sell out or something like that. They're looking for their return on investment like now. So, right. So a lot of these big investments groups, what I believe they do wrong is they go in and they cut inventory, cut expenses, cut this, cut that, to get the ROI up, right? Return on investment. Because, you do have to have a return on investment, but it doesn't have to be this week.
Right.
You have to have a long-term strategy. And a lot of times, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of times the big investment groups have a short-term strategy, which this particular one did. So they would cut out part numbers, and they cut out, I'll give you an example, that not knowing the business. You really have to know the business you're getting into. And clutches and driveline is not that simple of a business. A lot of people don't understand how a clutch works and the components that go to it, right? What I did, because I worked at Bonifani, right? So I understood the business. Well, they had their accountants, when they first bought McLeod, they had their accountants go through all the inventory, and they were saying, okay, they had their checklist saying, okay, this flywheel, we only sold 3 of those last year. So we're not going to sell that one anymore. Okay. So they would cross them out, and they would go through the inventory and cross out parts that they didn't sell a lot the year before. Right. And that sounds logical, right? But if you don't understand the business, the problem was this particular flywheel that they only sold 3 or 4 of the previous year was part of a bigger whole clutch kit that they sold 3,000 of. Okay, so if you X that flywheel out, now you just X'd out that clutch kit, that the flywheel is part of it. It's a package, right?
Mhm.
And they didn't understand that part. This is why I'm saying you got to understand the business you're getting into, right? So they X'd out all these parts, which X'd out a lot of their big selling products, which ended up, they lost half the business in the first 2 years. The revenue
Wow.
went down half. So when I started doing my due diligence, I clearly saw what they were doing. So I was like, I can fix this, right? I know I can fix this. So I made a deal. I didn't have all the money, but they were willing to hold what's called hold back paper. And a lot of companies will do this depending on their, how bad they want to sell the company. And they wanted to sell pretty bad. So, because they were losing money and all their other brands were making money, right?
Mhm.
So I made a deal to buy the company. I spent every dime that I had, took my money out of the stock market, and they were willing to take back, hold a note. So, for example, if you buy a company for, and I'm not saying these are the numbers, but I'll give you an example. So, say you buy a company for say $3 million, and then you only have $1.5 million, right? So you put down the 1.5 million and maybe pay interest only, or get a note for the other 1.5 million for say 3 years,
Mhm.
right? And do like an interest only. So in that time, you can get an SBA loan in the meantime. So you've
Right.
taken over the business, but now you own the business. It's not like going to the SBA and try to get a loan to buy a business. Once you get in it, now it's easier to do the SBA loan, right? Because
Right.
you're already running it, right? So that's what I did. So I had 3 years, to pay them back, and in the meantime, in those 3 years, I could work on the business, build it back up, and then apply for an SBA loan to pay off the difference. That's what I did.
Nice.
So, and then not only did I, in that 3 years, I made all my payments to them, which was interest only. I still owed them, a balance, right? So, but when I got the SBA loan, then I was able to, and 3 years is plenty of time. And the SBA sees, okay, you're running the business, it's getting better. They're more likely to give you the money, right, once you're in it. And there's many creative ways to get into business without necessarily having to buy it all up front, right?
Right.
And that was my background in finance, right? So one of my expertise that I learned at Wharton and my master's degree was I'm a financial problem solver. And that's what I had, a financial problem. And how do I solve this? Well, there's always ways to solve, right? Anything can be solved. Any financial problem, whether you're buying a business, continuing a business, taking over a business, there's always a solution, right? Buyer and seller have to get together. And of course, you're negotiating, but there's always give and take. It's not always like, I want this much for the money or for the business. If you don't give it to me, you don't get it. That's not, nobody's going to sell a business that way. It's always a give and take, buyer and seller, right? And this was a perfect example where buyer and seller, the sellers were willing to work with me. I was willing to work with them. We came up with a solution. I came up with the solution, and they approved the solution. They agreed to it. And that's how I got the business. And then eventually got the SBA loan, paid them off, and then I owned it 100%.
Nice. Can you tell us a little bit about the people aspect of it, of leaving, not necessarily leaving, or however it was defined with the Bonafanis, and then moving on to this new thing?
Well, I was the CFO there, and when they weren't interested in doing that, I wanted to do it on my own, and they were fully supportive. I'm still friends with Rob and Nikki to this day. We still talk many times a week with both of them. I still help Rob at the business. I talked to him yesterday for an hour, so I'm still helping them. We still have that brother relationship. I'm godfather to one of his daughters. So, we're pretty close. We're like family still. And so we do a lot of stuff together. We still work together. And I
Mhm.
still buy from them, and they'll buy stuff from us. But that relationship will never go away.
Nice. And how about the expansion of the company? You talked about the three brands that were added. Were all of those acquisitions, or were some of
They,
them?
they were all acquisitions. Okay, so as you grow, and especially being in the clutch business, one of the things that some of these bigger brands like Holly and race winning brands and some of those big investment groups, they buy lots of different brands. They're not necessarily specialized in any particular area. Well, I decided long ago that I'm just going to concentrate in driveline because no one's done that, right?
Mhm.
So we act as an kind of an we act like an investment group, except for not an investment group because I'm 100% owner. So I have no shareholders to um, to answer to,
Right.
right? So the decisions we make are investment decisions based on our what's called core competency. What is your specialty? What do you know best? It's called core competency. Where ours is driveline. Okay, we know driveline from the back of the crank to the drive shaft. That's where we concentrate our businesses, right? So I realized long ago that obviously clutches, if I just stay as in the clutch business, that's not a future, right? Because you can't even buy a car with a traditional clutch in it anymore, right?
Right. Right.
So and the SEMA data has told us that the clutch industry of aftermarket, that segment of aftermarket of pure just dry clutches is decreasing by 5 to 7% a year, right? So how am I going to grow this business, right? How my people are going to have a future, right? How am I going to grow? Well, diversification, right? But diversification within driveline.
Right.
So what is a good market to get into? Well, right away, automatic transmissions and torque converters. Now that's a business that is not going away. It's actually growing, right? So why not add automatic transmissions and torque converters to standard what we do here? So now you have both sides of the fence,
Right.
right? So you have clutches and you have automatics and converters. So we can supply whatever you need, no matter what. So I made a deal with Greg and Phaedra that owned FTI in Florida, and I acquired them. So your answer to your question, it was an acquisition. I
Mhm.
bought FTI from Greg and Phaedra. They still work with the company to this day, and they're great people. And so that was the first acquisition. And then, another business problem was solved is we sell a lot of Tremec transmissions.
A lot of.
Tremec transmissions, right? Tremec is the biggest name in streetcar high performance and racing transmissions, right? So we would buy them from what's called an elite dealer. So there's only 10 distributors in the United States that sell Tremec transmissions, and we have to buy from one of those, right? And
Mhm.
we would sell a lot of them. We were the supplier to Jegs for all their Tremecs, and we've had a couple of our other big customers came to us and say, "Hey, we want you to supply the Tremecs for us," but we couldn't because we couldn't get them. We couldn't get enough of them. We could barely
Right.
get enough to supply Jegs, let alone a bigger company. So the opportunity came along with Silver Sport. They are an elite dealer. They're an
Oh.
elite Tremec dealer. So that was a perfect fit, right? So it's not just that Silver Sport helps Silver Sport; it also helps McLeod because we buy our Tremec now from ourselves instead of
Right.
buying them
Right.
from another elite dealer. We're now the largest Tremec elite dealer in the United States.
Oh wow.
That's what Silver Sport does. Kits. They do complete kits, driveline kits. Like so, if you have a '69 Camaro and you want to get a whole new kit, we can supply the transmission, the clutch, the bell housing, the high throw up bearing, and the shifter all in one kit where you could do your project.
Wow.
So of course through Silver Sport we sell McLeod clutches, right? So all the companies help each other. And then and the PTT acquisition was last year, and we had a lot of demand for the 7 1/4 racing clutches, 7 1/4, 5 1/2, the small clutches. And so the opportunity came for Powertrain Technologies. So we bought them. They were in Chicago. So we actually bought them and moved them here to Anaheim. So we actually moved that company here. So now we're a full service driveline company. Okay, we can sell you a high performance clutch, a racing clutch, a small racing clutch, the 7 1/4s like the NASCAR teams and the drifters race and the road racers. A lot of like the Super Trofeo Lamborghinis and all the GT3 cars, they run the 7 1/4 clutch. So now we're in that market. right?
Yeah.
Now we're big into the Jeep market and off road, and with the FTI, we're now into the drag racing and monster truck transmissions and torque converters, right?
Wow.
We're a lot of the super comp racers, the high dollar bracket racers, they use FTI. Top Sportsman, Top Dragster, they're our big customers. Even ProMod, we saw a lot of ProMod. Todd Totaro is kind of one of our biggest customers. He helps a lot of our teams out. So that see how it all fits together. So
Right.
and then now you throw in the race car with all the brands on it at different times, marketing it. So it all works as a complete package. So the
Yeah.
business end of it grew from diversification and being a specialist in driveline. That was our goal.
Yeah. Tell us if there are any stories of, like, other than just putting the name on the car, what are some other ways that the car helps
Oh,
with the marketing of the brand
we
and
do. We
partnerships?
do. Okay, I'll give you an example. When the Jegs family owned Jegs, they no longer own it, but when they did, we used to do. We still do. It's called a dealer of the race. Okay. Now, Jake Jr. and the Greg and Coughlin family are great. I have a great relationship with them. We've helped each other throughout the years. I supply them with their Tremix. I do a lot of special projects for them still to this day. But what we do with the race cars, say we're going to race Indianapolis U.S. Nationals, and we'll do what's called dealer of the race. So we'll give 20% off or 10% off McLeod or Silver Sport or FTI products through Jegs through that race week. We'll run the
Yeah.
Jegs decal on the car. We'll promote it through social media. They'll promote it, and we'll do a special sale discounted of our products, and that's how we help pay for the race car, right?
Right.
So we do a sale with Jegs. They'll sell a lot of stuff that week, right? We know the race car works because the phones ring off the hook Monday, Tuesday after a
Right.
race. People see it on TV. But we do special sales with our big customers. We do it with Summit. We just did a big sale with Summit at Dallas last week. We had if you saw a big Summit decal on the back of the car, well, we
So
did a deal of the race with Summit. So we do special sales with our brands, with our bigger customers. And that's how, we work together. It promotes our brands, and it also helps promote our products through the big dealers like Summit, Jegs, Turn 14, Turn 5, all the big companies that we sell to. We try to help promote those. So we spend a lot of money on marketing. The race car is not cheap, but it's a marketing tool. That's simple as that. It's a marketing tool to promote our brands and to help our big customers sell our brands by creating demand, right? So you can't just sell your products to Summit and say, hey, go sell my stuff. You got to create your own demand, right? So if you spend money on marketing, create your own demand, and they ask for the product, well, now the big customers will come to you and want your product on the shelf.
Right.
That's the business
Right.
plan.
Nice. So the current race team is Pauly Racing, but there's been many different, not many, but a couple different teams along the process to get to where you are now. Can you take us just through the timeline of some of the top fuel teams?
Sure, sure. Like I said, I started racing alcohol funny cars in 1988. Raced for many teams, and then I stopped in 2005. Started racing the fuel funny car, and the first couple of years was with Jeff and Bonnie McGaffick out of Pennsylvania. They had the family race team. It was a good team, and then I raced a little while on IHRA, mostly IHRA stuff. Back then they had funny cars in IHRA, and we did some NHRA stuff, but it was just too expensive. But IHRA was a place where the lower funded teams, like myself and Terry Haddock and Dale Creasy, and at the time Matt Hagan was involved in that. He had his dad owned the team that he drove for, and Paul Smith. So we could go out there and race and be competitive and not have $1 million budgets. So we did that in IHRA in the 2000s up until 2008. I was driving for Paul Richards. I drove for their family. We're still good friends to this day, the Richards family. And then in 2008, I started driving for Paul Smith, and that's when I won my first Nitro Funny Car trophy. They called it an Ironman in IHRA. We did pretty good. We went to a couple of finals. And Paul was a guy, like I said, who taught me how to drive a car. So I ended up driving for Paul Smith in 2008. And then at the end of 2008, IHRA did away with funny cars, if you remember. and they just had Top Fuel. So believe it or not, in 2009, I went and got my Top Fuel dragster license because they didn't have funny cars in IHRA. So Bobby Lagana, I was very close with the Lagana family, Bob, Dom, and their dad. I was real close with them. So they had bought a new car, and they said, Paul, why don't you guys with the Paul Richards team, why don't you guys come over and race this car, and then we'll race our new car. You guys can race our car from last year. And I said, great, that's great. So got my license before the very first race in 2009 in IHRA, and raced. We raced I think 3 or 4 races that year in Top Fuel, and just in IHRA, and then we had fun, but it wasn't. We were all funny car guys. We're just like, this is fun and all, and Top Fuel car is a different car to drive, and I'm a funny car guy. But although I did enjoy driving the dragster, it wasn't anywhere near as fun as the funny car. To me, the funny car is the ultimate driver's vehicle, hot rod. So we decided to, just not race anymore until we could figure out how to, fund the funny car and go back to racing a funny car. And by then, it was 2010, the next year, and then I started driving for Jim Dunn. John Dunn has been a longtime friend of mine, and in 2000 and then 2009, he goes, "Why don't you, let's work a deal. You come drive our car." So I drove 2010. Now this was a full-time team then. So I drove 2010 and 2011. I drove for the Dunn family, and like I said, John Dunn and I are still best friends to this day. We're really good friends. We talk, we communicate all the time, and so I drove full-time for them for 2 years. We had the candidate car in 2010, and then we had the Rizlone car, the Dr. Fuel car, which was really a pretty cool wrap that we had in 2011. Raced for them full time, and then after 2011, they had somebody come in with more money than I did, so he got to drive the car, and then I was pretty much off and just concentrating on business. And then I drove for off and on for the Worsham, Del Worsham. He has his family car. He was at the time he was at the at Coletta's. So I would drive their car, and then Gary Densham, called me and drive his car. So on and off for about 5 years there, I would either drive Gary Densham's car or the Worsham family car, just off and on, just whenever. Maybe I would race maybe 5, 6, 7 times a year, depending on, whose car it was, and that's what I did. And then the opportunity came for the full-time car, or the car that raced at Coletta. So I joined in 2016. 2016, I joined Coletta Motorsports with the third funny car. Del drove one, Alexis was another one, and they bought me in to drive the third car. And at the time, Nicky Bonifani was one of the tuners on the DHL car, and I knew the Colettas pretty well, and Jim O was running it. Jim Overhopper was running Coletta Motorsports at the time, and we worked out a deal where they built another team, and I got to drive that car, and that was pretty exciting because that was in 2016, and we started in the middle, towards the end of the year. Todd Smith was bought in as my crew chief, and we did really well. We ran at Vegas, we ran at Pomona, and the car never ran slower than a 399. And this is back in 2016. So, things are going good. So now I'm looking forward to 2017, right? We had a sponsor that was going to come on board. I was going to be a full-time third driver at Coletta Motorsports, which was great for me, right? Something I've worked my whole life to. And then December 13th, 2016 came by, which was right after the PRI show. I had a heart attack. That's when I had a massive heart attack. I was at home. I just got home from the PRI show, and had a widowmaker heart attack, which was complete heart failure. And luckily, the girl I was dating at the time was home and called 911. And the lucky part of it is, Jason, the lucky part was I was at home, and the EMT center is right across the street from my house.
Oh, wow.
If I would have had this heart attack in Indianapolis at the PRI show, I wouldn't have made it because my heart stopped. It was complete heart failure. So she called 911, and they were at my house in 4 minutes because they're right across the street, and they saved my life. So they kept my heart going, took me to St. Joe's Heart Institute, about 20 minutes away from my house. And within 25 minutes, I was actually in the operating room having stents put in from my heart attack. And so, of course, when I had the heart attack, I had severe heart damage. Right, it wasn't like a little heart attack. It was heart failure,
Right.
which I had no idea that was coming on. So obviously now I'm lucky to even be alive, let alone drive a race car. So I had to withdraw from driving, obviously, because my heart was very weak. So obviously, being alive is the main thing. Forget about driving a race car, right? So I'm just trying to now recoup. So I had to give up the deal at Coletta's. That went away. So for the next couple of years, I never thought I would drive again. But so I just rehabbed, did what the doctor told me, exercise. I've always exercised and eat right. I've never done drugs, or I never smoked cigarettes or anything. I don't do drugs.
I read that you had no clue it was coming on because
No clue. I had no clue. And
pretty much in perfect health, but it was hereditary.
Yeah, it was. The doctor told me, listen, my grandfather died at 59 of a heart attack. His two brothers died of a heart attack. So you just got the unlucky genes, right? I had no notice ahead of time. I didn't feel tired. I was at the PRI show having a good time. I didn't have I wasn't tired, anything. It was just one of those things where I had 100% clogged LED artery, which is the main artery, and didn't even know it until I had the heart attack. It was 100% clogged. So, and that was just something you had hereditary heart disease, the doctor said. So I still, continued to exercise. I'm an athlete. I can't not exercise, and I still eat right and exercise. And I guess fast forward, after about a year and a half of exercising and trying to rehab my heart, the doctor says to me, he goes, he says, your heart's getting you're really doing a good job. Your heart's, efficiency is getting better. He says, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. And I go, well, is there a chance to, and this is like, go ahead, like 2000 and now it's like 2000 and about a year and a half later, he's like, I asked, so do you think there's a chance I could drive my race car again? So I said to the cardiologist, and he goes, race car, drive car? Oh yeah, go ahead, drive your car, right? And yeah, that's not a problem. I go, well, before you say that, I think
come
to a race to see what this race car is all about. And he goes, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to. And this was my cardiologist at the time. He was into sports and things like that, but he had never been. He wasn't a car race fan or anything like that. He was actually an MMA doctor.
Oh, wow.
So he I think he still does. So he's one of those ringside doctors at MMA fights.
Okay.
Right? He's here in Orange County. So the Winter Nationals were coming. The World Finals were coming up, right? So Pomona, which is right here. So I said, why don't you come with me to the race and I'll show you what these cars are all about. Oh yeah, I'd love to, right? So he comes with me to the race, and I asked Dell ahead of time. I said, and Dell was racing his car with someone else driving at the time, and I said, Dell, you mind if I show my doctor, the race car? I want to go show him what it's all. Oh yeah, no problem. Just go ahead and show him around. So I take him to the track. We get to the track, and the race car is in the pits, and I take him around, I look him around, and I said, this is what it's been. And he's like really like blown away. He hadn't heard it start yet, right? So it was, wow, look at this. He was like, I said, well, you haven't seen anything yet. So we watched him warm it up, and he was like holding his ears. He's like, wow, this is wild. I go, you still haven't heard anything yet, because when they warm him up, it's just idle. Right. And he's looking at it, and he goes, and at the time I had a defibrillator in my heart, in my chest. I had a defibrillator. And, because my heart was so weak, I had to have that in case, my heart stopped, it would keep it going. Right.
Right.
So he's looked at and he was smart enough to see, what are these magnetos, right? They're 44 amp magnetos. And he goes, well, what are they all about? And we told him, he said, well, they may affect your defibrillator. Right. So we're going to have to check that. I says, okay, well, we'll worry about that later. So then I take him up to the starting line for first round. It was on Sunday of the World Finals. And I take him up get him special pass to go up to the starting line. And he like could not believe, like he was totally blown away. He's like, we're going to have to rethink this. He says, I'm glad you brought me here, because this is pretty intense and pretty wild. You've been on the starting line of a funny car. It's like, He's like, wow. He's like, he was totally blown away. Now he's a fan, right? He was totally blown away. But now we're going to have to work on this for you to drive this stuff. So he said the first thing we have to do is we have to start the car with you in it and see if the magnetos affect your defibrillator, because they can monitor that with a laptop.
Okay.
So about a week later, I asked Dell, I said, Dell, can we come over to the shop? My doctor wants to do, oh, yeah, no problem. The car's serviced. We'll start it up and you can sit in it and he can do what he wants. And actually, Krista Baldwin came, she was our director of marketing. She actually has a video of all this.
Oh,
So we actually have this all on video where we started the car with me sitting in it, and they were monitoring, the doctors were monitoring my defibrillator and my heart through the laptop.
wow.
And let the car run, and he gives me the thumbs up. That means, there was no effect on the defibrillator. Okay, first step is good. Now we have to get you to drive a car with have our heart monitor on and all this. Is there any way we can get you to actually drive the car with all this stuff on, heart monitor and all that? I go, well, yeah, that's going to take a little more time. So in January at the test session at Firebird for the NHRA test session, Connie Coletta let me drive the DHL car. I have pictures of that and videos of that too, with my heart stuff all hooked up. So I drove the funny car 3 runs, JR Todd's car, at the test session one day. We made 3 runs. I ran 390, 321 on one of the runs, the fastest I had ever run. And I hadn't driven a car in 2 years. So, and then they looked at all the heart data and he goes, well, you look good. How do you feel? I go, I feel great. He goes, okay. Well, then he signed off my license. So that's how that got back to driving again.
Wow.
And then, after, then I wasn't with the Coletta team anymore, and they didn't have space at the time to do that again. So that's when I went to Don Schumacher, and Don, I want to, get back racing. What do I need? He goes, Paul, I'll sell you anything you need. So I ended up buying my whole operation, truck, trailer, race car, parts, everything from Don Schumacher, and I'm still there to this day. I rent space in DSR, and that's where I started back after my heart attack, and that's where my team is located still.
Nice. And I'm sure some people are listening when you talked about like your grandfather and his 2 brothers, and some people watching are probably like, man, that's actually me. That's my story. What advice or
I got a big tip for you. Big tip is, if you're over 50 years old and you have any kind of history of heart disease in your family, go get a stress test. People, if I would have done that, they could have saw that I had a weak heart, could have saw the damage, and they could have repaired it before I had a heart attack. Because, you can die, right? I was just lucky that he didn't die. But, if you have hereditary heart disease, a nuclear stress test, an echocardiogram will find that out. And you definitely have to do that. If I had one thing to do over again, was I knew I had history of heart disease in my family, and I didn't get a stress test. I was that stubborn guy that, oh, no, I'm fine. I feel good. I'm fine. But you don't know. I didn't know that I had that inside me. And the only way you're going to tell is if you have a stress test. So anybody over 50, if you have, and even if you don't have history of heart disease, you really should get it. It's simple. Just get a stress test, and that'll give you all the answers you need to know.
Yeah. Well, I'll up the ante on that if you're, because I have some clients who are under 50, and just with COVID and vaccines and certain things like that, they actually found out some stuff. Something triggered something, and then they ended up getting a stress test and realizing they had problems, and they were under 50. So for the people listening, I'm an up the ante. If you're over 40 or even 35 at this point, with some of the stuff happening, go get that stress test and take care of yourself. You can't have a racing business if you're not here.
For sure. I mean, yeah. I know someone who had 0 history of any heart problems. He was 46 years old. He had the 2 boosters, and the day of his second booster, he had a heart attack and died.
Yeah.
With a wife and 2 kids. No history of any heart problem. But after the second booster, the afternoon, 4 hours after he had it, he had a heart attack and died. Yeah. So I agree with you 100%. Get checked. Doesn't hurt.
Get checked. Doesn't hurt. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of the everything that you've shared. We end the show by we have 13 questions. They're 1 minute each. You don't have to take the full minute on each of them. Some of them may be redundant. So, if you want to pass, you can just say pass. But the segment is called Put Up Your Dukes. You ready to put up your dukes?
Sure. Let's do it.
Let's go.
Pat Benatar.
Cool deal. Well, first question is, what are the strengths of the industry?
Aftermarket. I'm in the aftermarket industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The car culture in our country is very strong, and it showed during COVID. Right during COVID, everybody in the aftermarket sales went up 20-25% because there were people at home that had project cars to do that they've been putting off. Well, they finally got around to doing them, and they were buying products, right? So, I mean, since COVID, it's fallen off. Gas prices affect us. When gas prices are down, business is good. When gas prices are up, business falls off. Simple as that. But
Biggest
overall, the market, the aftermarket, we're going to the SEMA show. Last year's SEMA show was record breaking, and we're getting ready to go to another SEMA show, and that's a good indicator of our industry.
Nice. What's the weakness?
Gas prices and the economy. Um, when you have a energy policy in this country that doesn't favor us with our own energy, it's going to hurt the whole industry. We need to be energy independent. And when we are, the aftermarket thrives. And when it doesn't, when we're not energy independent, it decreases. It's in the facts, it's in the numbers, and it's not just my numbers, it's all aftermarket numbers. We're energy related, and basically our whole economy is energy related. But when you talk about the aftermarket, especially is because we're in the car business, right? We're in the hobby business, right? And the downside is, when people don't have disposable income because inflation's high and the economy's bad and getting ready to go into war, people are apprehensive. They're not going to buy stuff. So it is very energy independent, I guess, like most other industries.
Biggest opportunity?
Opportunity. There's still opportunity in the aftermarket, which we're in racing. I mean, like I said before, we're in the hobby business, and our customers are people's hobbies who are racing or hot rods or muscle cars or whatever kind of car they have, low riders, donks, whatever kind of car. We're in the hobby business, and that's where the opportunity is, because the car culture is still very strong in this country, especially here in Southern California. I mean, we have cars and coffee events. San Clemente is the largest cars and coffee in the country. They get between 1,500 and 3,000 cars every Saturday morning. Think about that.
Yeah.
That tells me,
I get
and
it.
there's a lot of young guys that go, which I love to see the young guys, and the girls that love their cars. So when I go to that cars and coffee every week and see how that's still thriving, it gives me a good feeling.
Biggest threat?
Our government, EPA. The EPA has been trying to, curb the modification of cars. I mean, our own government is trying to shut down a billion-dollar industry, which is a mistake.
How about for you personally, most overrated part of your life or the business?
Overrated? I guess when you're getting interviewed on TV at the racetrack after a run, they think that's the glamorous part. They don't see all the blood, sweat, and tears, hard work that I've worked since I was a little kid to do what I want to do today. It's not something that mommy and daddy didn't buy me a race car. I did this all on my own, and it's a lot of years of there's 8 years of college of being in the library till 1 o'clock in the morning while other guys are out partying and drinking beer, and I'm studying because I had this big picture goal of I wanted to be a successful businessman and racer. People don't realize that this just didn't happen. This has been a lifelong pursuit, and it's been my life. I dedicated my life to get where I am today. I'm pretty happy about that.
Most underrated?
Underrated? I get to live my dream every day. I mean, I'm sitting in my office. I love being here. This is not a job. I get to work with cars and parts and have great customers that I get to talk to every day, and I love being here every day. And then I get to go to drive my funny car on weekends for my business. I got the best. I don't even have a job. I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed. That's the word I'm using. I'm a very blessed guy. The Lord gave me gifts of hard work and concentration that I was able to, just be persistent through all these years of maybe seeing that little bit of light at the end of the tunnel and knowing that I'm not going to give up until I get there.
Biggest mental hurdle?
Mental hurdle? Just worried about, the economy, and where, especially now with things that are going on around the world. Um, you try not to worry about it because you don't have any control over it, right? So you just have to go about your day and just say, you know what, it's not in my control. Let's just, keep going, doing the best we can. That's what I tell my people.
Right. How about the last thing that you have to say? You told the story of a lot of the people that you grew up with, and you used a lot of like, seniors, and now you work with the juniors, and the juniors are your peers. How about the last thing for the people older than you, the people that came before you in the industry and racing? What's just the last thing that you have to say to them?
Well, they're the pioneers, right? The guys that started the aftermarket back in the 60s, I believe, and in the 70s. And a lot of the companies the legacy companies that were around today were started by these guys. And they just started out, and most of them started out in a garage, just being an entrepreneur. I'm going to make this product better, or I'm going to make this product. And then they built it into big companies. That's being a true entrepreneur, and those are the guys I look up. I consider myself, and when people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm an entrepreneur, right? And so following the legacy of what these guys started, I just want to continue it and help the younger generation continue it after me.
How about that? On that point, the younger generation. What's the last thing that you have to say to the younger generation?
Well, I love we really help the younger generation as much as possible. Like the FTI, we have this team called the Farm Team. So we sponsor junior dragster racers. We sponsor a group of junior dragster racers every year. They're called the FTI Farm Team, and that's the future, right? Those kids, like, they didn't have junior dragsters when I was little, but I wish they did. But these kids are our future, right? Not just future in racing, but future customers and building and continuing the car culture in our country. I love to talk, like when I go to Cars and Coffee in San Clemente. I love talking to the young guys and the young girls about cars, and they ask me how I got there and how I can afford this and that. And I kind of share my story with them to kind of give them a motivation to, yes, they can own a Lamborghini or whatever car or business that they want. Just, just pick your passion. If the cars are your passion, then that's how you can make your living without overworking a day in your life.
And finally, the last word to your peers.
Peers, we need to get energy dependent. I think we all need to work together on that. You can change that at the voting box. We need to vote to be energy independent in our country, to get back to where we need to be. I mean, we still have growth potential, but we need to work together and win at the voting booth.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the show today, and thank you very much for sharing all of your story. I mean, all of these stories, they're beneficial to me, and hopefully they're beneficial to the people listening. And so we definitely appreciate it, and we'll definitely be rooting for you on the track and in the business.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I was just a little kid with a dream. That's it. I just wanted to be a funny car driver. So everything that I've done is centered around this. How am I going to get there? And everybody's path's different. This just happened to be mine.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your path and for helping the people listening help figure out their path. And thank you guys for watching and being a part of another episode of Drag Illustrated's The Racing Business with Jason Dukes. Again, we're brought to you by Racers Club. Racers Club, it's been back. The relaunch has happened for about 2 to 3 weeks now. So definitely go online and get your very cool Racers Club swag. The show is brought to you by your executive producer, JT Murder Tundra Hudson, who's here every week to make us look good and have the show and bring it to you. And we'll see you next week. So thank you for joining us again.
Thanks.
Love you guys.